pay attention to this. What you are imagining right now isn't a video. It isn't a stream of evidence or a reel of security footage that captures a crime in motion. It is something far more fragile. It is a single frame, extracted from a digital surveillance system that had been overwriting itself for days. It was a ghost in the machine, a piece of data that should have been deleted, but it wasn't. That single, corrupted image would become the most important artifact in a sprawling investigation. It would expose the darkest betrayals of trust, and ultimately, it would lead them to a woman who had been missing for 11 agonizing days. This is the story of a perfect suburban life, shattered in a single afternoon. It is the story of two men who smiled in the face of a family they were planning to destroy. And it is the story of Rebecca Hartman, a mother who fought for her life in the silence of an empty building, and whose last desperate act of courage was captured in one frozen moment of time. March 11th, 2025, Baltimore, Maryland. To the outside world, the Hartman residence was the picture of stability. David and Rebecca Hartman had built a life that was enviable in its quiet consistency. David worked in finance. Rebecca was a beloved school administrator. Rebecca, aged 50, was the engine of that household. She was the type of person who ran on a schedule. She was predictable, reliable, and deeply connected to her family. She wasn't the type to turn off her phone. She wasn't the type to miss an appointment. And she certainly wasn't the type to walk away. At 2:00 p.m., David received a text message from his wife. She said she was heading out to pick up a few things and would be back before the kids got home. That text message was the last time anyone would ever hear from Rebecca Hartman. When David Hartman pulled into the driveway at 6 p.m., the dread set in immediately. Rebecca's car was parked in its usual spot. It hadn't moved. He entered the house, calling her name. No answer. He walked into the kitchen. Her purse was sitting on the island. Her keys were next to it. And then, the most chilling detail of all, her cell phone. It was sitting right there on the counter, fully charged, buzzing with unanswered notifications. A woman like Rebecca does not leave her home without her phone. She does not leave without her car. She does not leave her purse behind. In that moment, David Hartman knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a spontaneous trip. Rebecca had been taken. By 8 p.m., the Baltimore Police Department had arrived. Usually, in missing persons cases involving adults, there is a waiting period. Police look for signs of voluntary departure, a fight with a spouse, financial trouble, a history of mental health issues. But here, the indicators were all wrong. The police treated Rebecca's disappearance as high priority from the very first hour. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood immediately. They knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen a strange car, a delivery truck, or anyone walking near the Hartman property between 2 and 3:30 p.m. The answers were frustratingly uniform. No. The neighbors had seen nothing. The street was quiet. Security cameras from nearby homes showed the street traffic, but nothing pointed to the Hartman driveway. It was as if Rebecca had simply evaporated from inside her own home. Investigators turned the house upside down. They looked for signs of a struggle, a broken vase, a scuffed rug, a drop of blood. There was nothing. This suggested two things. One, Rebecca was taken by surprise, overpowered so quickly she couldn't fight back. Or two, she knew her abductor. She had opened the door for them. Detectives began digging into the family's background. They looked for enemies. They audited the finances. They interviewed David separately, checking his alibi. David's alibi was rock solid. He was at work, on camera, surrounded by colleagues. The finances were healthy. There were no affairs, no secret debts, no hidden enemies. For the first few days, the investigation stalled. 2 weeks before she vanished, the Hartman family had hired a small, independent construction team to renovate their downstairs bathroom and hallway. It was a two-man operation. Both men were immigrants from Romania who had been living in the United States for several years. They had built a modest client base through word of mouth. They were known as hard workers, quiet, efficient, affordable. Police learned that over a 2-week period in late February, these two men had been in the Hartman house almost every day. They had learned the family's routine. They knew when the kids left for school. They knew when David left for work. And crucially, there were several days when Rebecca was the only one home while they worked. Detectives brought Ionescu and Dumitru in for questioning. The interview was tense, but the men stuck to their story. They claimed they had finished the job a week before Rebecca disappeared. They said they hadn't been back to the house since. They glanced at each other when answering questions about their whereabouts on March 11th. Their alibis were vague. They claimed they were driving around, looking for new jobs, estimating other projects, but they couldn't provide a specific address or a specific client who could verify their location. Police obtained a warrant to search their work van. It was a chaotic mess of tools, drywall dust, and fast food wrappers. But in the back, near the seal of the rear doors, crime scene technicians found something. A few long strands of blonde hair. In a construction van used by two men with dark hair, this was a red flag. The hair was rushed to the lab. DNA testing confirmed it within 24 hours. The hair belonged to Rebecca Hartman. This was the break they needed. Ionescu and Dumitru were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping, but the case was far from closed. The defense attorneys immediately argued that the hair proved nothing. The men had worked in Rebecca's home for 2 weeks. They had hauled materials in and out. Transfer evidence, they called it. They argued that a hair could have fallen onto their clothes while they were working, and then fallen off in the van. It was a plausible defense. Detectives began a digital deep dive into the suspects' lives. They pulled bank records, phone data, and property deeds. They were looking for any location associated with the men that offered privacy. They found a connection to a relative of Ionescu. It was a commercial property on the outskirts of Baltimore, an old office building that had been vacant for years. It was a concrete skeleton, scheduled for demolition in a few months. But when detectives looked at the utility records for this abandoned building, they found a discrepancy. The building was supposed to be dead. Yet, 2 months earlier, right around the time the men started working at the Hartman house, the electricity had been turned back on. Why would anyone pay to power a building that was about to be torn down? Police obtained a search warrant for the structure. A SWAT team breached the entrance, moving room by room through the decay. The ground floor was empty. Just debris, rats, and old office furniture. But as they moved through the dust, they saw it. Fresh footprints. Heavy boot marks that didn't match the age of the dust around them. The footprints led them to the basement. In the subterranean level, the air was cold and stale. The officers swept their lights across the dark concrete walls. They found a room that had been recently cleared out. There was fresh trash, food wrappers, water bottles, and mounted on the wall, watching the empty hallway, was a surveillance camera. It was an archaic system, likely left over from when the building was operational years ago, but the power cord ran along the ceiling to a live outlet. The red light was blinking. The system was recording. Technicians immediately seized the DVR box connected to the camera. They rushed it to the digital forensics lab. The hope was that the camera had captured everything. The arrival of the van, the suspects, Rebecca. But when they plugged it in, their hearts sank. The hard drive was tiny, an old model with very little storage. It was set to a loop mode. It recorded for 24 hours, and then if the drive was full, it immediately overwrote the oldest footage with new video. The suspects had been in custody for days. The camera had been running that whole time, recording an empty hallway, overwriting the critical days of March 11th, 12th, and 13th. The video was gone. Digital forensics is rarely like the movies. You don't just hit a button and enhance. It is a tedious process of sifting through binary code, looking for artifacts, ghosts of data that haven't been completely scrubbed by the overwrite. The technicians worked for 48 hours straight. They carved through the corrupted sectors of the hard drive. Most of it was noise, static, useless data. But deep in the unallocated space of the drive, they found a fragment, a standalone image that the video compression software had created as a reference point. They reassembled the data. They cleared up the pixelation, and suddenly, on the screen, a picture formed. March 22nd, just days before the police arrived. The image showed the hallway of the basement. In the distance, the elevator doors were closed, but standing just in front of them was a figure. It was a woman. She looked disheveled. Her clothes were torn. Her hair was matted. Her face was turned toward the camera. Her expression a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. It was Rebecca Hartman. This single frame changed everything. It proved she wasn't just missing. It proved she had been in this specific building. It proved she was alive days after her abduction. And, most heartbreakingly, the context of the image suggested she was out of her cell. She was standing by the elevator. She was trying to escape. Armed with the photograph and forensic evidence gathered from the basement room, which was now being treated as a primary crime scene, detectives returned to to the interrogation room. They sat Vasila Dumitru down. They didn't yell. They simply slid the photograph across the metal table. "We know she was there, Vasile. We have the camera." Dumitru stared at the image of the woman he had tormented. The silence stretched for a minute. He began to talk. He confessed that he and Ionescu had become obsessed with Rebecca while working in her home. They fantasized about her. They saw her kindness as weakness, her nice home as something they could violate. On March 11th, they returned to the house. They knocked on the door, claiming they needed to check a pipe they had installed. Rebecca, trusting them, let them in. As soon as her back was turned, they attacked. They gagged her, bound her, and threw her into the back of the van. They drove her to the abandoned building, a place they had prepared months in advance by turning on the electricity. They kept her in that basement room for 11 days. Dumitru admitted to the unthinkable. They had assaulted her repeatedly. They had tortured her. And they had turned on the camera specifically to watch her. A sick form of control. But the single frame? The one image that survived? Dumitru explained that too. On March 21st, Rebecca had managed to loosen her restraints. She had fought for days to weaken the rope around her wrists. When the men were in another part of the building, she broke free. She ran into the hallway. She made it to the elevator and frantically pushed the button. That was the moment the camera captured. The moment of hope. But the elevator was slow. It didn't come. Dumitru heard the noise. He ran down the stairs and tackled her before the doors could open. He dragged her back to the room. The beatings got worse after that. The men were angry she had tried to leave. The next day, Rebecca succumbed to her injuries. The medical examiner would later determine she died from blunt force trauma. When the men realized she was dead, panic set in. They wrapped her body in plastic. Ionescu, who had previously worked at a large construction site across town, knew that a foundation for a new high-rise was being poured that week. They took her there in the middle of the night. They buried her in the wet earth, just hours before the concrete trucks arrived to seal the ground forever. Dumitru led the police to the site. It took excavation teams 2 days of drilling through fresh concrete to find her. But she was there, exactly where he said she would be. The trial began in August 2025. David Hartman sat in the front row every single day. He forced Ionescu and Dumitru to look at him. He wanted them to see the husband of the woman they had killed. The prosecution laid out the case with surgical precision. The hair in the van, the Dina in the basement, the confession, and finally, on the large screens in the courtroom, they displayed the single frame. The jury gasped. That frozen image of Rebecca, terrified, yet fighting, standing on her own 2 feet trying to find a way home, was the emotional anchor of the entire trial. The defense tried to argue for leniency, claiming it was a robbery gone wrong. The jury didn't buy it for a second. Both men were convicted on all counts: kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing, David Hartman stood up. His voice shook, but he didn't stumble. "My wife let these men into our home," he said, staring directly at the defendants. "She offered them water. She treated them with respect, and they used that trust to plan her death." He paused, taking a breath that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. "You destroyed my family. You took a mother from her children, and for what? You have gained nothing. You are going to die in a cage. I hope every time you close your eyes, you see her face. I hope you never have a moment of peace." The abandoned office building has since been demolished. The concrete foundation where Rebecca was buried is now part of a finished skyscraper, a hidden scar beneath the city. David Hartman and his children still live in the family home. They couldn't bear to leave the last place Rebecca was happy, but they couldn't live in it the way it was. David hired a new contractor, after an agonizing vetting process, to completely redo the work Ionescu and Dumitru had done. He scrubbed their presence from his life. The children, now 15 and 13, are in therapy. They are learning to navigate a world that feels less safe than it did before. But David tells them one thing, over and over again. He tells them about the photograph. He tells them that the image isn't just evidence of a crime. It is evidence of their mother's spirit. It proves that even in the darkest hole, even after days of torture, she did not give up. She broke her chains. She ran for the door. She tried to come back to them. The single frame, extracted from the overwritten data of a forgotten camera, is a testament to the horror of what humans can do to one another. But it is also a testament to the will to survive. Rebecca Hartman was not just a victim who vanished. She was a fighter who almost made it out. If you are hiring workers for your home, trust your instincts. Check references, and if something feels wrong, do not ignore it. This case was solved by a single frame of digital evidence, but thousands of others remain cold, waiting for that one glitch, that one clue, to bring the truth to light.